And welcome to everyone to the last module of the awareness session. I really hope you have enjoyed it so far. You have heard my name several times during this session, but still, I'm Riccardo Luigetti, and together with Sabine Hobernhauser and Martin Harvey, we will bring you through the various activities we have in place here at EMA to cooperate with other regulators around the world. I will start with a brief introduction of me and my colleagues. Agnes already said that the three of us, we work in the International Affairs division here, and Agnes is the head of this division. Sabine is a principal scientific administrator in the International Affairs Division of the European Medicines Agency. She holds a master in pharmaceutical science and a PhD in pharmacology from German institutions that I won't name because I can't pronounce it. But she also has a certificate in epidemiology from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicines. Sabine joined the EMA in 1997. She has had various important positions, including as a scientific team leader, officer for external communications, but very importantly, she has been our liaison officer at FDA for 5 years. She just came back a couple of weeks ago. And for 5 years, she has represented EMA at the US FDA, and she has contributed to facilitate cooperation between the European regulatory network and the FDA, promoting shared regulatory and scientific understanding and convergence on both regions. So Martin instead, he is also an important guy here at EMEA. He's joined the agency 1995. I joined a long time ago, but Martin joined much before me. And he has been part of the International Affairs team since 2014. Prior to which he also had several important roles at EMA. He was the head of the office of the executive director, and he's also been a head of communication. He's a lawyer by training. And then myself, I'm Riccardo Luigetti, as I said several times. I joined the International Affairs team 3 years ago. I'm a chemist, a biochemist as a background, and I also have a PhD in biochemistry, and I have been a quality assessor and GMP inspector for the Italian agency many years ago before I joined the EMA 14 years ago. I have worked at the inspection department for many years, and then 3 years ago I joined International Affairs. That's I also have to mention, thank you, Agnes, for reminding me that we have a new person in the team who has replaced Sabine in the US at the FDA as liaison officer, and she's called Tanya Teixeira, and maybe some of you will have the luck to meet her in somewhere. With this, enough, I guess, as presentations and introductions.
Can we have the presentation? Can we have the presentation, please?
Sorry, I can't.
This is a slide. Just yeah.
Okay, yeah. As regards the content of this presentation, we will bring you through on how we deal with globalization, and then we will describe some of our bilateral cooperation activities, the engagement we have on multilateral activities, and also we'll speak about an important concept, which is reliance, and how we promote reliance among regulators. So why international regulatory cooperation? The short answer to this is globalization. Globalization really makes, the globalized world makes cooperation among regulators necessary. This is because, for example, medicines manufacture and distribution are more and more globalized. Manufacturing processes and supply chains, including generics, are increasingly complex. So in this framework, cooperation among regulators is essential to avoid duplication of work and mostly to release the scarce resources available for more critical areas, and in certain cases this is important to speed up patients' access to new and or affordable products. Also, new medicines are often complex products such as biotechnology, gene therapy, cell therapy products, you name them, and sometimes they have now really sophisticated formulations involving, for example, micellar systems, nanoparticles, and some regulators around the world may lack the resources or specific competencies to carry out assessments of these products before they are put on the market. So they need to rely on other regulators. And this is not only true for developing countries, just in case someone was thinking like that. In Europe, we have the same. Sometimes the specific competence for assessing certain complex products are not everywhere. They're only present in some of the member states. So this is recognized in the network strategy to 2020. We have now a very nice strategy that if you have time, you might want to read. It's not an EMA strategy, is a network strategy. So it's a common strategy for all the competent authorities in the European Union. And in this strategy, the contribution to the global regulatory environment has a very high place, and it's very high in the agenda of this strategy. So I would say that enhancing international cooperation is now part of our public health mission. So it's very important for the agency and for the European Union regulatory system in general. Now, before I give the floor to my colleagues, I just want to spend 1 minute on how international cooperation has changed in the years in the last 30 years, maybe. At the beginning, it was based on harmonization. Some of you might be familiar with the International Conference of Harmonization, now Council of Harmonization. Basically, harmonization means that the rules or the guidelines, whatever it's under discussion, has to be the same between the various partners. Now, this is still very important and something we should aim to, but in certain cases, it's better to be less ambitious, and we speak about convergence. Convergence, in my own words, is when the systems need to be equivalent. The results need to be equivalent, but not necessarily reached using the same harmonized guideline, the same harmonized processes, etc. So different systems, but same or equivalent results. This is particularly important because we have, of course, in the last years, we have a lot of new global players, new players in the global regulatory environment. We can think of China, India, and other global players which are we have appeared recently. So in our arsenal for cooperation, we also have work sharing. I have to say personally, I don't think we use it enough. I mean, we have plenty of work sharing in Europe between the member states, but maybe we could have more work sharing with international international partners. And also in the recent years, we have the bilateral cooperation is actually it has been replaced in certain cases by multilateral cooperation, and we have now some global coalitions of regulators working together. And the last bullet point here is reliance. This is a concept that is changing how we cooperate. Reliance is a very important concept. In my words, again, is when regulators makes available to other regulators his work. It can be an assessment report, it can be an inspection report, a PSUR or whatever. It's made available to the others, and then the others use it according to their own rules, procedures, and their own wish, really, their own wishes. So this is important because basically it doesn't need a very complex regulatory framework or legislative framework in order to cooperate. But we will see a bit more during the presentation about reliance and how we promote it. So this slide is just to say that international cooperation is really important at the agency. I won't go through the bullet points, but the third one, to me, is very important. We have calculated that about 80% of all products going through the EMA committees have had some discussion at international level. So this should give you an idea of how important international cooperation is for us. And then last slide before I give the floor to Sabine. We have in this slide some example of bilateral and multilateral cooperation where we are involved. They will be described with some details later in the presentation, but another thing is a link to a very interesting document I believe that we have prepared at International Affairs a couple of years ago, and it's called Connecting the Dots. In practice is a sort of collection of all the international activities going on as regards international cooperation between regulators. With this, I've finished my introduction, and I give the floor to Sabine.
Thank you, Riccardo. Sabine, please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Riccardo. Ladies and gentlemen, Riccardo talked about bilateral cooperation, and here's just to illustrate which are the countries with whom we have confidentiality arrangements. So you can see we have Canada, the US, we have WHO, but also Australia and Japan, and Switzerland. Yes. We also have mutual recognition agreements or ACCA agreements with various countries. Again, you can see you have Canada, recently the US, but also Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and again, Switzerland. And I will be explaining in my talk what those agreements allow us to do. So all of the discussions that we are having is governed by confidentiality arrangements. And the beauty of it is that not only do we have individual confidentiality arrangements with the different authorities that I've pictured here, but they also have confidentiality arrangements with each other. This means that now the trend is more and more that we don't have discussions just in a bilateral level, but increasingly more so at a trilateral, quadrilateral, or even pentalateral level. The only rate limiting factor is the different time zones. And when I was still FDA liaison based in White Oak, Silver Spring in the USA, we would, in order to be able to get all the regulators around the globe at the table, we would start our teleconferences as early as 7 o'clock in the morning. And at the same time, we had colleagues from Japan or Australia and New Zealand calling in as late as 1 o'clock in the morning. Here in London, we are quite comfortably in the middle. So now I'm back here, it's much more easier to do that. But colleagues have been always very enthusiastic to call into those discussions and really constructively contribute. So I will, since I'm just back from my role at the FDA, I'd like to illustrate the bilateral cooperation at the example with the FDA. So the confidentiality arrangements allow us to share pre-decisional draft documents, draft guidance in confidence with the assurance that those documents will also be remaining confidential. And you can see that this covers human and veterinary medicines that have either been submitted in form of a centralized application to the European Medicines Agency, or it has been brought to our attention by the national competent authority and has been referred to our main committees, the Committee for Human Use, but also for the veterinary use, but also to our Pharmacovigilance Committee. It allows also to exchange staff. So that's why I had been based at the FDA for 5 years. We have a counterpart, Dr. Sandy Queder from the FDA, who's based here as liaison. Riccardo mentioned we have a new liaison at the EMA, my colleague Tania Teixeira. And we also have a liaison from the PMDA here at the EMA. And he's there. Yeah, I'm sure you have met him in the course of the last 2 days. We also allow participation of expert meetings. So whenever we have an important expert meeting or a committee meeting, and there's a topic that has been part of an international debate with our confidential partners, we would invite them to either come to those meetings in person or follow via broadcast. And we do also participate in expert meetings on the other side of the pond. Now, under the umbrella of the confidentiality arrangements, we also have fellowships. And in the last 5 years, we have organized some 22 fellowships with another 2 just happening this week. And I brought you along the list of the areas those fellowships covered. It ranges from inspections over pharmacovigilance, but also certain types of therapeutic area. And what is the scope of these fellowships? On the one hand, it's good to meet your counterpart. It's always different if you see the people. We've been able really to discuss with them than just having a phone call. But it's really a tool to deepen our cooperation, understand what are the concerns on the other side, but also to explore different areas of cooperation. So I'm pleased to say when you look at the list of the different fellowships, those fellowships were instrumental on exploring and creating new areas of cooperation. So we created a new cooperation in the area of patient engagement, recognizing that we have different ways that we engage patients in Europe as compared as well to the FDA. And we also recognize the need to discuss more early for the development of rare diseases. And as such, with the fellowship on rare diseases, we explored whether there would be appetite and need to explore a new platform on rare diseases. So I mentioned the word clusters. So clusters is a platform where we engage not only with the FDA, but as you can see as well, our other confidential partners. And I brought you the list of all the different areas where we engage on an international level. We have some 14 official clusters, but we have as well some additional 4 platforms in the area of inspections. And then there are many other more informal opportunities to have either ad hoc product discussions or really dive into something that was perhaps raised on a cluster and where we didn't have enough time. So for the clusters, in average, we meet once per month via teleconference, and we discuss any early development strategies or safety signals. And if needed, we follow up either with sharing then confidential documents like review documents or assessment reports to be sure that we're aware on important issues which really touches upon our core business in the different regions. So some examples what we have achieved in the area of product development. So for the area of orphan medicines, we developed a joint application form and annual report. So this facilitates the submission of information by applicants. In the area of pediatric medicines, we have now established what we call common commentaries. This is a tool by which we have a record of our discussions that we're holding in the platform of the pediatric cluster, where one agency takes the lead and we comment on the development plan for pediatric studies. We then ask the other agency to complement that, and at the end, there is a record of the discussion, and that helps the sponsor to be sure that when they develop their clinical trials, they are sure that they can be addressing the requirements of both the EMA and the FDA. Going beyond pediatrics, we have what we call the parallel scientific advice. That is a formal way by which an applicant can engage both the EMA and FDA at the same time. They would submit their application for any question on the development. So this can cover efficacy or safety or quality. And they can engage the experts at the same time. So we would have preparatory discussions between EMA and FDA. Then we would have a joint sponsor meeting, so the sponsor could come either here to the EMA or to the FDA, or even we might have, when sponsors can engage at both sides, they might even be present both at the FDA and EMA, but one agency would take the lead. And at the end, the sponsor gets a document which will reflect clearly the position of both the EMA and FDA, again, striving for global development. For situations where the sponsor is not ready to submit to both agencies at the same time and doesn't, or might as well be that they're not quite there yet, we have as well the possibility of consultative advice. So that would mean that one agency would take the lead, and we would then involve the other agency at milestone meetings. But again, this would need to be endorsed by the applicant, and the applicant will have to authorize us to share the information for this development plan. And just to complete the list, we have also submissions on qualification of biomarkers and clinical outcome measures. And really the aim of those engagement is to support a global development plan, have an increased scientific and public convergence, and also reduce administrative burden. In the area of product evaluation and surveillance, I mentioned already before, we can discuss any aspects of the development on an application dossier. We can discuss safety issues, and we have now developed a very good way by which we do inform our international confidential partners about any pending regulatory decision. Because what is important is that whenever we take a decision not only to approve a medicine, but also, for example, to restrict the indication or increase contraindications, or if need be, suspend a license, our partners need to know, and they have to understand why, especially if they might take a different regulatory decision. And at the same time, we have also ensured that we get from our colleagues at the FDA an early warning on planned safety communication. So we're not taken by surprise and find out in the press what actions have been taken. And we're also prepared when we get public inquiries for that. So I mentioned, in addition to the clusters, we have as well ad hoc discussions. This means whenever something comes up which is of high public interest and we need to touch base with our partners, typically within, I would say, 24 hours in an emergency, but in 48 hours, also considering the time difference, we'd be able to pull together a call with the relevant experts. Now, let me talk as well a little bit about quality. Obviously, you have heard the talks of my colleagues from the inspections team earlier today, and we're conscious, and Riccardo mentioned as well, the reason of international cooperation is that we really have embraced the fact that we can't do things in isolation. So manufacturing is done on a global scale, and very often active substance is manufactured outside of the EU and outside as well of the countries of our trusted partners. The same thing is as well, we want to ensure data integrity. So when concluding my talk, I'd like to just very briefly run you through these different initiatives. So first comes to mind shortages. So that's a topic that at the EMA we have recognized some years ago. Together with stakeholders, we developed a plan how we can minimize shortages of medicines in the European Union, shortages due to manufacturing issues. And taking this further, we have engaged with our partners, not only with the FDA, but also as well with Australia and Canada. And we hold quarterly teleconferences where not only do we inform each other about any shortages that are happening and discuss how can we remedy, and perhaps is there a supplier in a different country that can help overcome that shortage. But we also join forces to see what are the mechanisms that we do, how we can prevent shortages. Now, in the area of manufacturing, GMP initiatives, I'd like to flag the API platform, where with our trusted partners, we do exchange information on plant inspections, but also conducted inspections. And that helps, and this has a focus on inspections conducted in third countries, where we learn from each other and help each other in our risk model better plan inspection in order to avoid that instead of having a wider coverage of inspections, I have to repeat myself. Instead of duplicating inspections, we have a wider coverage of inspection. And this led us as well to several mutual recognition agreements. I've shown you earlier the list of countries with whom we have engaged in mutual recognition agreements. And I'm pleased to say that this year we signed the 7th of our mutual recognition agreements with the US FDA. For us, it's the 7th, but for the FDA, it's the first time that they're engaging in such an initiative. And this was a great team effort from the European network, the European Commission, but also colleagues at the EMA. And the aim of this mutual recognition agreement, as in fact as well for other mutual recognition agreements that we have concluded, is to make better use of inspections. So whenever, as of the 1st of November, whenever an inspection has been conducted in the US, we will be able to rely on the outcome of that inspection and not go to inspect in the US. And the same will be true for inspections conducted in Europe with a time frame, because obviously we have 28 member states, so we're currently finalizing the assessment of all the different EU member states. It is also linked to the fact that we have, with the FDA, concluded a confidentiality agreement, a so-called Super CC, which will allow the FDA to, in the future, share inspection reports, including trade secrets. So those of you who have been working a little bit more with US colleagues might be aware that there is a law which will prevent FDA from sharing trade secret information. But there was a new legislation passed a couple of years ago, and that was really the cornerstone for FDA to engage in a confidentiality agreement with all EU member states. And in order to really make the mutual recognition agreement operational, they are now able to exchange inspection reports without needing to redact them. This means as well that we will receive those inspection reports much quicker, and when they have an alert on a quality issue, we get that information much quicker. To conclude, we have similar initiatives as well in the area of good clinical practice. I'd like to mention the initiative on GCP inspections, where again we exchange information on planned inspections, but as well concluded inspections on applications for medicines approved or going through the approval of the centralized procedure. We've learned a lot from each other, and it helps us again when allocating resources and planning inspections. And we have seen over the last years that through this initiative, we have been able to widen the inspection coverage on clinical trial sites. And we have a similar initiative as well for generics and bioequivalent studies. So let me stop here and hand over to my colleague, Martin Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine.
Okay. So Sabine's just been talking about the GMP and GCP work we do with FDA and other regulatory partners. And the basis of that is reliance on each other. I'm reminded the very first presentation yesterday morning spoke about reliance in the European system, reliance between the member states. So and people are given various different definitions, but I'd like to take you to the source definition, that of the World Health Organization. And they have a consultation published last year on good regulatory practices, and that includes a definition. And the definition gives two steps. The first, you take into account either entirely or partially the assessment done by somebody else. It could be an assessment of a product, it could be an inspection. And then you retain responsibility for your own decision. So this is a part of the good reliance practices that here at the agency we very much seek to promote in all of our relationships with partners. And the good reliance practice is very much at the heart of the European medicine system that hopefully you'll have learnt an awful lot about over the past 2 days. It really is the building block of what we do here. I've given you 4 of the building blocks there. Common legislation, the same scientific and technical standards, harmonized scientific guidance, either those at the international level of ICH or European EU guidelines, and a common application format, so the common technical dossier, again, an ICH standard. So those are really the building blocks that we feel are important for any reliance system, because they set a level playing ground between all the participants. That is complemented by something that Brendan Cuddy spoke a little bit earlier today. He spoke about the GMP guide and the single format for authorizations and GMP certificates. So those, for us, are what you need in order to have an effective and efficient reliance system in place. We're going to give you 3 examples now of reliance in practice, if you like. The first is the Article 58 procedure. Talk a little bit about a collaborative registration pilot we have going with the World Health Organization. Then finally, a pilot's going on with the International Generic Drug Regulators program. So, Article 58. It's not a particularly attractive name, but it's the name we have at the moment for a procedure that allows a sponsor to come to the European Medicines Agency and get a scientific assessment of a product that will be used outside of the European Union. So for us, it is a very important part of what we see as our public health mission and mandate of the agency. It's not just within the European Union, but further outside with our international partners. So the evaluation is done jointly by the European Medicines Agency and the World Health Organization in a type of partnership. And we also bring into the review regulators, experts from the target countries. So for example, if the product is intended for use in sub-Saharan Africa, we will bring in and involve as part of the process regulators and experts from sub-Saharan Africa. So it is a collaborative process between all those 3 arms. We use as part of the process the same standards and the same regulatory tools and procedures as we do for a product intended for use in the European Union. So the same stringent regulatory authority assessments, the same pool of experts here in Europe, the same standards. But one thing that is different is that we will look at the benefit risk of the patients in the target countries. So it may well be that the range of the products available in that country, the primary health setting, the clinical settings in those countries are slightly different. There may be difference in all sorts of practical and concrete ways, which mean that a particular product that may be used here in the European Union or elsewhere wouldn't be suitable for use in that particular country. We don't at the end have a marketing authorization in Europe, but by involving the WHO and the target countries, we are helping to give them an opportunity to rely on the scientific assessment here in order to issue their own marketing authorization back in their own countries. Now, just before I move on then, the sorts of products that have come through the Article 58 procedure are primarily vaccines or medicines used to treat public health priority diseases. And so HIV/AIDS is probably the largest class of products that have gone through the procedure, but also we have malaria and TB products. But there are also other maternal health products that have gone through the procedure. And there are many more currently in the pipeline. The second example of reliance that I'd like to share with you is a pilot that we currently have with the World Health Organization on collaborative registration. Now the collaborative registration, as it says there, it seeks to accelerate the approval of products in target countries that have been subject to assessment or pre-qualified by the World Health Organization. And the pilot we have with WHO means that they will take assessments of products that have gone through the European Medicines Agency, and then with the countries that are involved in the collaborative registration, seek to accelerate the licensing in those countries. So we've had 5 products have either gone through the process, the pilot successfully, or currently going through the process, and they cover AIDS, TB, and malaria. Just to give an example of the acceleration that we're talking about, the first product went through the pilot was for an HIV product, and it got approval in 10 countries in Africa in the quickest was 3 months and the slowest was 12 months. Now that is a significant advantage and gain on the time that it would ordinarily take to get licensure in many African regulatory authorities. The second product that went through the pilot gained approval in 6 months for all the countries involved, and the third product gained approval in 9 countries in 11 months for all countries involved. We have 2 products currently going through the pilot. So we believe that this is a very interesting procedure that offers an awful lot of benefits for countries who are prepared to participate in the collaborative registration procedure the WHO offers. A third example of good reliance is with the International Generic Drug Regulators Program. And this foresees that in real time, so the other 2 processes we've spoken about, Article 58 and collaborative registration, EMA assessment goes to the WHO and then goes to the target countries. With the IGDRP pilots, the target countries involved get the assessment reports in real time. So as we are assessing, we are sharing the assessment reports with those countries. And currently it involves the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, Health Canada, the Taiwan Food and Drugs Administration, and Swissmedic, our partners in this pilot. And we're beginning to show results of accelerating approval of generics and improving reliance. Now, I spoke about sharing assessment reports, and they are an incredibly important part of facilitating reliance. So I just wanted to flag up to you that the agency stands ready to share its assessment reports with any regulatory authority that requests them. Now, either if it comes from a national regulatory authority, we will share the full assessment report unredacted. If the sponsor agrees, we'll share that with you. If the sponsor company does not agree, we will share with you a redacted version of the assessment report. And in some cases, we will. There is national legislation that actually permits and encourages reliance. And there are a number of countries, for example, I believe Canada, Mexico, Singapore, and Switzerland, that actually permit the national agency to rely explicitly on the assessments of stringent regulatory authorities. So this is a very interesting development we're seeing. So training and capacity building. This has been covered elsewhere in the program, but I just needed to remind you that the European system of 28 member states, plus Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, there is a large number of national authorities involved in the system, and training is a key part of ensuring that we have a common basis and that all the experts are trained to a common standard. But we also realize that it's important to open up these training opportunities to our partners. And so we regularly invite international partners to join us in these training exercises, whether that be for inspectors or for assessors. We have a network training center that operates, and we are in the process of planning access to non-EU regulators to the training center. We're also working with the WHO to make access available to these training opportunities through the WHO portal. And for us, it's an important part of capacity building. So to actually allow and encourage national authorities elsewhere, outside of the European Union, to learn and to take benefits of the training courses we have in place. Now, I was asked to give a couple of examples of multilateral engagement, how the agency engages around the world. One example is the International Council for Harmonization and a veterinary counterpart. We mustn't forget that also the agencies are both for human and veterinary medicines. We also engage with the IPRF, the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Forum, which are currently in the process of consolidating with the IGDRP I just mentioned. That is a regulators-only platform looking for convergence of members. So ICH is about harmonization. IPRF, IGDIP is much more towards convergence, going back to what Riccardo was talking about earlier on. But there are many. Riccardo spoke about connecting the dots. Connecting the dots tries to make sense of the many different initiatives going around the world. And then one particular platform that seeks to make a sense of all these different initiatives and bring a bit of strategic direction is something called ICMRA, so it's the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authorities. And this tries to give a sense of direction and strategy for what the regulators are doing to cooperate as they work towards meeting their international public health missions. And the last example there, which I won't go into detail because Brendan Cuddy mentioned it earlier, is PICS, and that's the Pharmaceutical Inspection Convention Scheme. Again, that's all about harmonized guidance and seeking for convergence between inspectors. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Riccardo, who has the honor of the last slide of this two-day session.
You can't believe it, probably. That's really the last one. In conclusion, it is no longer whether regulators will cooperate with each other. It is about how best to do it now because of globalization. Basically, there is no question anymore. If we want to cooperate, we have to. So we have to find the best ways to do it. And we have many weapons in our arsenal, as we have seen before. The EU system is an example of successful cooperation and reliance among regulators. Actually, I hope you have learned in these 2 days that our system is based on full reliance and full transparency. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that it's the best example of reliance among regulators. International cooperation is part now of EMA's and the European network's daily work. At EMA, we have a team here, actually, dealing every day with international cooperation, for example. Striving for convergence is imperative, and early dialogue is encouraged. With this, we have really finished the presentations, and I open the floor to any questions you still might have. We'd be very happy to spend another few minutes answering questions.
First of all, thank you for all these efforts. I have a question for Martin. As he said, we can share the full report of the evaluation of the product. In SFDA, we have now a new regulatory path, a registration path, which is we call it a bridge and verification registration pathway, in which if the product is registered in EMA and FDA, we can register the product in 30 working days. If it is in either one of these agencies, we can register it in 60 working days. However, we ask for one of the requirements is the assessment report. My question is, can we, as an agency, as an SFDA, can we ask the EMA, for example, to share with us the report, the evaluation report, without making or asking the company to provide the report?
Yes. Okay, that's the short answer. The longer answer is, it's probably better to actually to encourage the company, the applicant, to give it to you. It's also part of regulators also need to be transparent. So Sabine was talking about the intense regulatory cooperation with the FDA, and a lot of this is done with the full knowledge of the sponsor. I think it's important that applicants also understand that regulators, we're transparent. We don't just expect them to be transparent, but we're also transparent. But if need be, you can ask us, and we will provide the assessment reports, redacted or unredacted, depending on whether the company gives permission.
Just to say that most of the companies, especially the international companies, I will not say the nationalities, but they are international or multinational. One of their concern is that they cannot provide the full assessment report, and this is my question in a direct way. You gave me another appointment, so.
So my understanding, and I'm looking to Agnes, who's I think just nodded at me, is they absolutely can share the assessment report with you.
What they might have to do is to ask us for consent, but we would give it. Yeah. In any case, I can't. I mean, of course, we have to evaluate this case on an ad hoc basis. I mean, but I can't think of any reason why we shouldn't give the the consent. And the other thing is that there is a question and answer on our website actually that explains exactly this. So I can guide you to our website where it is published, and you can show it to them really if you need to.
The only thing we would not share is the master file of certain ingredients, because then they may not be the property of the marketing authorization holder. In that case, we would not provide this information, because we cannot. The marketing authorization holder doesn't have access to that information. The outcome is reflected, but not the details. So that's the only thing we could not share. But otherwise, no problem.
All right, so I'm a little bit confused. So in terms of the assessment report, does this mean there are two assessment reports? The assessment report that gets published that is redacted, and then the assessment report that goes directly to the sponsor with more detailed, unredacted information?
Yeah, actually, I think this is a very good question, and thank you, because it gives us the possibility to clarify this. Maybe all the assessment reports for every product which is actually authorized through the centralized procedure, the assessment reports are published. They're called European Public Assessment Reports. In many cases, this might be sufficient. So, you might not even have to ask the company to forward the assessment report, or us to forward the assessment report. But the published assessment report, this EPAR, European Public Assessment Report, is not the full assessment report. Certain parts are redacted, certain parts are just not there because it would be a too complex document. So the EPAR is there, is published. Maybe in many cases I would think it's sufficient for every purpose, but if you want the full assessment report, then you have to ask the company, or because you work at FDA, I understand, because we have a confidentiality arrangement, actually you don't need a consent from the company. We would share the assessment report, if you ask, without any big bureaucracy.
So the part as mostly the part that is redacted mostly is the quality part, the manufacturing secret. That as we say, we can share under the confidentiality agreement, even more with the super CC as was presented, where we can share trade secrets. The other part that may be redacted in part is the non-clinical, where sometimes there are some proprietary tests and things like that, or but the vast majority, and the clinical part is not redacted, because as we also publish the study reports now, we're trying to be as transparent as possible, but we have to respect very few areas we can restrict the information that is in the EPAR, but we can share with the consent of the company if there is no confidentiality arrangement, and without the consent of the company if there is a confidentiality arrangement. And just before the enthusiasm after this meeting says that you will all send the request to get the confidentiality arrangement with us and contribution to our clusters and contribution to our exercise. Please bear with our resources. All this exercise is fantastic and we love it. As you can see, the passion is also there, but we also have limited resources, and you may have heard about something called Brexit, which is going to affect us, especially next year, in the next 2 years. So bear with us if we are not able to do as much as we would like. Bear with us if there is a path to establishing trust and reliance and prioritization with the authorities with which we have more activities. We start by them rather than the one where we have fewer activities. So, and international relations are also something that are dealt with by the European Commission. So it's a trilateral arrangement that we need to set up. And the Commission has even less resources than us. So we're not able to accept all requests for confidentiality arrangement, clusters and so on, but we're trying as much as possible to give you opportunities for engagement, training, information and sharing, but just bear with us if it's not as much 100%. Yes, please.
I have a question to Riccardo. When you look at the countries with which you have a mutual recognition agreement, they all are part of what is commonly known as stringent regulatory authorities. So I was just wondering, I know that, for instance, for the US FDA, when you signed this agreement for mutual recognition of GMP, they actually came to Europe and assessed the regulatory capacity of each national authority. Did you do the same thing from your side for all the other authorities? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, did you receive any expression of interest from countries that are not known as being stringent to have the same kind of agreements with the EMA? And if so, did you reject any based on the fact that they are not stringent, even though the stringency, I know it's not something that is very, scientifically, let's say, established?
Okay, so let me answer the first part of your question on the mutual recognition agreement with the FDA. Yes, clearly, in order to prepare the grounds for the signing of the agreement, we had to do an assessment. So we had a team composed of colleagues from the European Network and the Commission, who went to the FDA, and we assessed the capability of the FDA to have a similar GMP standard as we do. And at the same time, the FDA went and they made use of the joint audit program. That's a program that we have in place in order to ensure that throughout the EU, we maintain the same standards in doing inspections. And what we have done is we have invited FDA to participate as an observer in those inspections. And we're just about, I think we've just concluded the joint audit program for all 28 member states. And based on the outcome of that, FDA has been assessing all of the individual EU member states. And the aim is by the 1st of November, so that's the next milestone meeting, that we will have finalized, we finalized in fact already in July the assessment of the FDA, and that will now be posted in the official journal from the European Commission. But the FDA will be finalizing the assessment of the first 8 EU member states. Now, in relation to requests for other mutual recognition agreements, we have obviously those which you see on the world card with whom we have concluded agreements, and also we have just been revising the agreement with Health Canada, and I think we're just about as well revising with Japan.
Yeah. Increasing the scope, for example, of Japan. So we have not completed completely already what we have in place, and we are working towards state. As far as I know, we have not refused, as of today, any mutual recognition agreement. Maybe, Gorgios, if you have information to the contrary, I'm happy to hear that. But I think, again, we will certainly look at whether we need to have that as a priority, considering the implication, because behind you have to set the process. It's not just signing the paper, which is taking time. It's all the capability assessment, which is behind and which takes time, and also users' resources that are not used for, I mean, okay, it's part of the actual inspections, but it's still also resources that are used for this exercise, and maybe. So it will progress, I'm pretty sure, but we are going to a pace which may not be very fast.
Thank you. Maybe the first one would be a follow-up to what Hassan was asking. When you get a report from a company, how are you certain that this is the actual report which they got from you guys?
My answer to this is that here we tend to trust companies unless we know that we can't trust them. But for some reason. But so the system is based on trust in many aspects. But I would personally say that if you don't trust this company, that the assessment report is really the same that was submitted to us, you have to ask us basically directly, and of course in this case the company has to give the consent to us to share the assessment report with you, unredacted. Or a lot again can be done through the EPAR, which is published on our website, and so a lot of information is already there. But if you want the full information, either you trust the company or you have to ask us directly with the company consent.
For me, that's good.
Okay, so then the second question would be, I think you talked about the inspection, this one you were just explaining, with the MRA, with USFDA, for example, where you don't inspect the sites they've inspected in US. Do you also collaborate on sites which are outside US and Europe?
Yeah, in fact, that is part of the scope of the MRA, that it's a May provision that whenever there's an inspection conducted outside of the EU and the US, the authority can consider as well to rely on the results. So it's not a must. It'll be, but it will help as well in our risk-based approach when we plan inspections. And we have certain of the MRAs that you see here on the card, which cover, for example, third country inspections.
It's a very important benefit for inspectorates, because clearly if we don't have to duplicate inspection, we can send more inspectors elsewhere. So even in our risk-based approach, we can expand the scope of what is going to be inspected only once, and then share the outcome and rely on the outcome. That is really a very, and even industry is very happy, because instead of being inspected every month by another authority, which is also costly for them and resource intensive, they are much happier to provide one, to contribute to one inspection, and that is used by several authorities.
Okay. And in fact, I mentioned the API platform. This has really contributed to the trust building, because that was initially focused only on inspection in third countries. So there we really started with information exchange and trust building. We also have conducted joint inspections so that the trusted partner who are participating in that platform, they see how inspectors from a different region conduct inspections, and they're more comfortable as well to rely on the outcome. So that's in fact was an exercise done separately from the MRA, but in a way as well helped this trust building process, and will now in the future allow authorities to say, yes, we've done this trust building, we have now the MRA, so why don't we rather, instead of inspecting the same site, perhaps we wait. We have the results from that inspectorate, we look into that, we have perhaps information on any issues that need to be looked at, and we go there perhaps in half a year, in a year's time, and then we report back, or we do a joint inspection.
And sorry, I also want to add to it. As a previously GMP inspector, I have never understood why these mutual recognition agreements were only recognizing inspections carried out in the territories of the agreement partners. But now this is changing, because I understand that our mutual recognition with both Canada and Switzerland, actually they're expanding the scope to inspections carried out outside of the territories. But for some of the agreements, it's still like that. Only the territories of the partners are covered.
Then the other question is on the Article 58. So who initiates this process?
The sponsor. So the sponsor, either a pharmaceutical company or an increasingly an NGO, so non-governmental organization, product development partnership, they will come to us and say they would like to have an Article 58 opinion. At that point, we go to the World Health Organization and ask, do they agree that this product is eligible for the procedure? Because it's a joint EMA-WHO enterprise. WHO says yes or no. We then also say yes or no. If we both agree, then the procedure then moves forward. We can give it's not just for the final opinion. We can actually help and give scientific advice for products that will go through the Article 58 procedure. So we can involve WHO and regulators and experts from the target countries in the actual scientific advice process, where we're giving advice on the clinical trial design and all sorts of developmental issues. So there is involvement of the target countries right from the very beginning. But the initiation is done by the sponsor.
So maybe during the initiation phase, last question. During the initiation, the sponsor also then submits an application to the countries where they intend to market.
No. So there will be no. The application for authorization in the target countries will come afterwards. If you're smart, you would have also had a conversation with those target countries in advance as well. And so the idea is, so you're building up knowledge in the countries that you intend to use the Article 58, you intend to engage with the WHO for pre-qualification, then you intend to seek authorization in those countries. It may well be that you will be conducting clinical trials in those countries. And so you will be having conversations with those countries in advance as well. So the idea is to create this magic circle between EMA, WHO, and the target countries, so that you can then work with us as you develop the product, and then seek the approval. The final end game is the approval and use and access. And finally, after the procedure, it's about access by the patients. But you're trying to create that magic circle so that you end up with access at the end.
Okay, so I have two questions. The first one is related to what he's just asked. So how many products have you processed through Article 58? And do you have a database of this? And if a country that was not originally a target country now is target, how do they access that work? That's the first question. And then the next question is on the SRA procedure. You refer to it as a pilot and that you have 2 products in there. What's the future of that? Do we see that becoming a normal procedure? And if so, what kind of products and when will that be a normal procedure? Thanks.
Okay. So far, the Article 58 procedure we've had 9 products that have gone through the process successfully. And all 9 of those products are listed on our website. We currently have, as of yesterday, because I had a new one yesterday, we currently have 6 more in the pipeline for the next couple of years, in the next 2 years, next 2-3 years. So there is a growing interest in the procedure. All the products that have been successfully moved through the procedure are on our website. Importantly, it also includes one that wasn't successful. And so again, you can see it's on the website. It's about regulatory transparency and why we said no. You can see the information. It's also very important. So it's all there for you. I hope that's the answer to that question. And you asked about the SRA procedure. Now, the pilots, we understand from the World Health Organization, this pilot, they're not seeking to close it yet. So we don't quite know when the pilot will finish, but notionally, it should become a regular routine approval route. And anything we can do, frankly, to increase reliance and recognition of assessments by regulators in low and middle income countries to increase access is something that we should all be welcoming and encouraging. So just to correct you, there are 5 products that are in this pilot, and we hope that there will be a couple of others coming through in the next couple of years.
Sorry, Agnes, no. But just very quickly. I don't know, I think it hasn't been mentioned that Article 58 and the SRA procedure can go together. So the SRA procedure can be applied to products that we have evaluated at EMA as Article 58. Yes. Yes. No, just to, yeah.
Sorry, I was just curious, what's the average length of time for the Article 58 procedures from the time you get the request to when the application is actually filed with you and then the assessment action?
It's a terrible thing to say, Linda, but I don't know. I will go and do some work on that. One thing I will say is that I mentioned during the presentation that we can apply, that we treat Article 58 applications like any other application going through the centralized procedure, which means we can use all the different tools. You heard about PRIME, you heard about conditional marketing authorization, you heard about accelerated procedure. So we can apply accelerated review for an Article 58 products. And so the variance depends on the quality of the dossier. The quality of the dossier is everything. We as regulators know that. And there's some smiles and nods going around the room, so I think it's a common statement. So to 2 Article 58 products have actually had accelerated review. So I think the last one we had, chlorhexidine, which is used as for the umbilical cords of newborn babies, that went through in 5 months. So it was extremely quick. We have another accelerated review that'll start later on this year. So we will, if the quality of the dossier is good enough, we will accelerate it because we understand there is an unmet medical need at the end. So quality, quality, quality.